Welcome back to another episode of Fund Friday. We've got a very unique and one of a kind guest today. We just met one another at Sam Silverman's fully funded event. So, a lot of his passions, his interests actually really line up with mine. As some of you know, definitely those closest to me know, I love to travel. And it's not often I speak to someone who laps my traveling, but not only laps, but runs around it in circles and circles and circles. So please welcome here Michael Wagman, managing partner of Nimble Capital Group. How are you?
I'm great, Craig. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So we connected and you had the keynote speech. I think you closed out Sam's event, which makes sense because your angle to the world and to life is a little bit different than the average person's, right? So there's so many ways to live. There's so many options now, and the world is so much flatter and smaller because of the internet. And I think no one really leverages that or exemplifies that more than you. So let's just talk about you before we get into kind of your thesis on raising and whatnot and your lifestyle perspective, but how you got into the chair you're in today, and kind of your journey to be able to live the way you do now.
Sure. So I guess we can go back to the beginning. So out of college, I went straight to work for a high-tech company. I worked in sales for about 3 years, and that was it. That was as long as I lasted in the corporate world. And I pretty much at 25 years old, I said, never again. I don't like anybody telling me what to do. And, I don't really know where that came from, but it's just been burned in me my whole life. And so I moved to Florida, where houses are very cheap, and I had been watching too much HGTV at the time. This was probably 2016, 2017. And I bought my first house, and I said I'm going to flip it better than they do on the TV shows, and that's exactly what I did. So spent about 3 years flipping houses, trying every kind of residential real estate you can imagine, from being a realtor to being a wholesaler to ultimately house hacking, which was one of the best decisions I ever made. And then, getting more into long-term rentals, buying more duplexes, smaller multifamily, moving out of my house hacking building and doing Airbnb with it. So I tried everything, but eventually I ended up in the world of multifamily syndication and much larger um, multifamily deals, which I'm sure your audience is very familiar with. And yeah, now today I am raising for multifamily deals, full-time capital raiser. I also do development deals. We also have a retail commercial deal, and we've begun looking at some raw land opportunities as well.
Very cool. It's the raw land. It wouldn't be for fact for like glamping or anything of that nature, would it?
No, well, actually, funny enough, we actually own a 10-acre parcel in a kind of a vacation rental home area, and we've thought about doing glamping with it. So we'll see. I have some good connections in that industry now, but no, not at this time.
For those who are not privy to what glamping means, it is glamorous camping. It is a phrase, if you will, where folks will buy a plot of land and they'll basically give you the components or a really high-end camping setup where it's a more luxurious way to camp, but you're still in the nature and things of that nature. So there is the fun fact for those who didn't know today. You do in fact learn something new every day if you didn't know. But let's talk about kind of that journey, though. So you went from the single family, the house hacking, the Airbnbs into multi. What about those angles didn't really, I guess, work for you? What about those angles was not the right fit, would you say?
Yeah. So the house hacking was in a 4-unit building. I lived in one of the units and I rented out the other three. And it was the first time in my life that all of a sudden I had, not only did I have no housing expense, but suddenly people were paying me to live where I was living. Looking back, I should have probably never even told them I was the landlord. They would just let them think I was another tenant, right? But it created some interesting dynamics. Still, one of the best decisions I ever made. Um, and as for the Airbnb, I still had it fully furnished. So I moved out and I did Airbnb with it. And some months there was fantastic income, and some months there was very, seasonal or low income. And it just, I don't know, to my personality, long-term rentals, the rent is the same every single month, assuming they pay on time, right? And it just comes in, whether you get off the couch or not, it's there, it's consistent, it's secure. And I like that security.
Makes sense. And then Talking about multifamily, how you got there, was there some kind of come to moment, some sort of like group that you were seeing online? How did you go from those,
Yeah.
things to the next, if you will? Because it is a very natural trajectory. So I'm always curious to hear the
Yeah,
reasoning.
this is actually kind of a funny story. So I was going to a lot of networking events in the Tampa Bay area where I was living at the time. And my plan was after the 4 unit building, I had bought two more duplexes. And my plan was to get up to 20 units basically entirely through small multifamily duplexes, things like that. And I met a guy at one of these networking conferences, and it's a real shame. I do not remember his name to this day. I don't know what this guy's name is, but
Anonymous, we'll call them
yeah,
that.
we had a phone. We set up a call. We met at the networking event. We set up a call, and I told him my plan, and he said, "Why wouldn't you just buy a 20 unit building?" I said, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "Yeah, like 10 duplexes. Why don't you just buy a 20 unit building?" I was like, "You can do that." Um, and that was really like my aha moment. I ended up reading Multifamily Millions by Dave Lindahl. That was another kind of like, holy crap, I can buy a 100 unit building moment, and basically never looked back after that.
Right. So let's talk about the metrics that you look for when you underwrite deals. Because naturally, when you're raising the amount of capital that you're raising, it's funny how flooded your inbox may or may not be. But typically, it's
Yeah.
probably, you're out there, you're posting it, people find you. So what are some of the metrics that get you excited? What are the locations that you kind of look for? Can you talk about your thesis a little bit?
Sure. Well, when I was first learning how to do multifamily, I went through a mentorship program, and in this mentorship program they teach you that you can do everything. You can do 100% of the capital raising, 100% of the deal sourcing, 100% of the property management, asset management, everything like that. And it's like, in reality, I'm sure you know just as well as I do that that's just not how this industry works. There's a lot of specialization that happens. And so I was in the beginning flying all over the country. I was going to look at deals in like Tennessee and South Carolina and Georgia and all over the place. And I was based in Phoenix. And then I met my business partner, who would eventually become my business partner. And what he had was really highly specialized knowledge of this specific area that we were in the Southwest. He used to be a territory manager and sales all over the Southwest. So he was like driving between El Paso and Arizona all the time and everything in the middle. And so he had really, really highly specialized area knowledge. And so for us, that was just a natural segue to, let's buy in the Southwest because we know what's going on here. We are the boots on the ground, and we have, that specialized area knowledge. Um, so we buy in New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and Arizona. Looking into, maybe Nevada eventually, but right now this is where we are. And that works for us. I really like New Mexico actually as a sleeper market. I think it's been very, very good to us. And a lot of our, most profitable cash flowing deals are in New Mexico. And, just nobody really thinks about it. They're like, what's going on there? What would you invest there? But it's going great for us. So,
Well, it's very interesting
yeah,
because Arizona and Texas, which is of course where New Mexico sits in the middle, it is a blue
right.
state. So some people don't like that. But the thing about New Mexico that is appealing to me is it's probably not really oversaturated with a ton of groups that are in there. And, what are the benefits, I guess, to New Mexico? How does it kind of structure? Because when you get into a place like Texas, really high property taxes, pretty high insurances, but then you get to a place like Arizona, those are really low. So how would you say
Right.
it compares and contrasts to those two places?
It is somewhere in the middle. It does have its own drawbacks. I would say that the major drawbacks of New Mexico are that, one, it is a very blue state and it is tenant friendly. We have had issues with a tenant who stopped paying for 6 months, and it took us like a year to actually get him out of the property. So things like that do happen. But from a sort of saturation perspective, you're right. Like, it's not quite, there's the pool of investors looking there right now isn't the same as, say, Arizona or Texas. Um, and we've been able to kind of, through that sort of post-COVID rush that happened, that glorious 2 years for multifamily operators. I mean, New Mexico is kind of riding the same wave as everyone else, but people just weren't looking there the same way. So we were able to capture fantastic rent bumps on a lot of our properties. I know one of them was about $400 in rent bumps within 2 years, and that's just to get it up to market, and that's not pushing market. So, yeah, I like New Mexico a lot. It's been very good to us.
So do you look for like, what would you say like for New Mexico, like for a deal like that? Are you looking for kind of 50, 100 unit kind of opportunities there or larger, more institutional size? What's kind of the sweet spot you found?
Yeah, well, so ironically enough, we own some smaller properties in New Mexico. We own a couple of 20 units, and we own a 30 unit there as well. But at this point, yeah, we want something with enough scale to at least have a leasing office on site. I think that just makes a tremendous difference in terms of, the maintenance staff always being there, having their tools there, having, the leasing staff always being there. Just really, if you're going to be playing in the multifamily sandbox, that's kind of our minimum threshold of where we want to go. Now, there's certainly opportunity in the smaller, 20 to 30 unit deals, and those have been good for us. But at this point, we're probably looking for a minimum of like 80 to 100 units.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for those people who kind of want to conceptualize this, I do think by and large, there's probably some bigger screamers that you're going to get in that sub 100 unit space and even sub 50 unit space, because typically speaking, the owner is going to be someone who's more of a mom and pop, meaning, maybe your friend's parents or grandparents or so on and so forth that have owned the property for maybe a couple of decades, and they have a relationship with these tenants and they're not marked to market, meaning they're not at to market rate. So then you can acquire these deals, spend no money, just re-tenant it and put it to market, and all of a sudden be into pro forma and then sell it with some meat on the bone to the next person potentially, right? So you get those opportunities for those smaller properties. But the problem with some of those smaller deals is that they can be a little bit more tricky to manage from a personnel perspective, because exactly what Michael is talking about, when you do have too small of, number of units, you can't have a full-time staff there. So it just makes it a little bit tricky from the economies of scale perspective and an efficiency perspective. That said, talk about Oklahoma, because actually no one's mentioned that state either. How does that state kind of fare compared to Arizona and Texas? Because I've heard that the most landlord-friendly state in America is, in fact, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Is that correct, or is that a lie? I've been told bad information.
I don't know about the most landlord friendly, but it is good. It's landlord friendly. Let's that was a deciding factor in us entering the Oklahoma market. And like all real estate, everything is hyper local, right? So there are certainly pockets of Oklahoma where you probably don't want to invest. But we found a portfolio of properties in the Tulsa market, which were significantly under market rents due to, mom and pop ownership and poor management. And, we jumped on the opportunity because we knew going in that, the market was right, and that we have that. I think it was $150 rent bump potential just on day one going in, and it was a loan assumption deal, which is something that in order to make a deal cash flow in today's environment, you really want to be finding those loan assumptions.
Yeah, and that's such an awesome opportunity. And how long did that loan assumption last for?
So the owner refinanced in like late 2021 when the rates were crazy low. And so it was a portfolio. We had like a blended interest rate that we were assuming about 3.5%, which is fantastic. And he got it on a 10-year term. So at the time of purchase, we still had about 7-8 years left on it, and we plan on holding it for 5, which means that theoretically the next buyer could also assume our note as well on the end.
That's incredible. So the fact that you've got the loan assumption to have probably really good cash flow going in with the upside to push up rents due to where they're marked at is a really cool and compelling story. So speaking of deals that you look for, are you a story-driven investor and capital raiser? What are the components to you that get you super excited? Is it something of that nature? Is it, the market story? How does that land for you when you kind of decipher the opportunities that come across your email?
Yeah, 100% absolutely yes, story driven. I think if you don't have a compelling story to tell, you don't have a way to sell anything to anyone. You could have, well, this is a 3x return, but why? You
Yeah.
have to, people care about the why, and you need to give them, something to get excited about, what makes this unique, and, what makes us unique as operators. What do we do differently compared to other people? Because, we're both players in this game, and there's 1,000 other players all with deals. And most of the times these deals are going to offer similar return projections. And it's like, how can you actually set yourself apart? What makes you different? As an operator and on a deal by deal basis.
Yeah, without a doubt. And are you typically looking for the loan assumption story, the under market rent? Like, what is, if you were to draw up a perfect deal that you would acquire a race for, what would those components, I guess, look like?
Well, it's changed. It's changed a lot just within the last few years. You got to be on top of what's going on in the current situation in the market. And right now, everybody knows that for the last 2.5 years, interest rates have, since July 2022, they basically doubled overnight and haven't looked back since.
No.
And to find a deal that cash flows in today's interest rate environment with a new debt at 6 or 7%, it's going to be really, really hard. You might cash flow 2 or 3% out the gate, and that's not a compelling story for investors, especially when they have memories from 2 years ago. They were making crazy, crazy returns in short periods of time. So yeah, you gotta, to answer your question, what is the perfect deal? It's whatever works right now based on the current market environment. And you have to be really up to date with what's going on currently and with what's working right now. And that's where the compelling story comes from. So what is working right now for me is, well, we can assume this loan at 3.5%, and that's going to allow us to cash flow in this environment. But yeah, if we were going to go out and get a new loan at 6% or 7%, it would never cash flow. And that's what makes a deal viable right now.
Yeah, and I think something is so interesting that you mentioned there, which is, a normal deal would typically speak in cash flow very lightly. What's really interesting to think about too, when if you're a capital raiser, I'm kind of talking to you here, and if you're an investor, this also lands for you as well. And Michael, you'll appreciate this, but if people can invest in a risk-free account, get a bit, or in a CD and get X%, or invest in a debt fund and get a certain percent, or if you're going to even invest in a treasury fund and get risk-free money, essentially, your deal and your cash flow has to really exceed those risk-free returns for it to really make sense, because they're basically risking their capital in hope of growth. So it's very challenging to get people compelled to that if there's no cash flow there. If you're getting cash flow, which is treated very well from a tax scheduling and appreciation, that's kind of the money match right there. So that's what we have to solve for as operators, as capital raisers, and basically bring those opportunities to investors. And the other thing that we're really working against right now, unfortunately, as I'm sure you know, is against the stock market, because the stock market's at an all-time high, at
Right.
least for today. It's November 19th. We're recording. Now, if there's a stock drop or something like that, which I think could happen, don't hold this against us. But stocks have been really hot and high ever since kind of the drop down that happened in 2022. They've been absolutely ripping. So that's something that we really need to work against as to why our option and our kind of vehicle is better. And quite frankly, a lot of people are looking around right now, and that's not been delivered by a lot of the sponsors that people have invested with.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
certainly.
let's talk. Yeah. So let's talk about your lifestyle and kind of some of the decisions. So you have a travel bug. Clearly, you have a thirst for seeing the world. So where did that stem from? And then how did your business and that kind of addiction and sickness, if you will, kind of come together and coexist cohesively?
Sure. Well, so I kind of mentioned this earlier about how multifamily and really kind of commercial real estate investing on this level is a team sport. You're just really not going to do it all by yourself. And what that allows for is specialization. And my specialization in my business and the role that I do is entirely capital raising. I don't want to pick up a finger in regards to asset management or underwriting deals. I have a business partner who's really, really good at that stuff, and that's what he does. And I focus on finding us the money. Um, and so, as I was sort of designing ways to optimize this process and specialize and really hone in, I had to ask myself, like, what do I want my days to look like? What is that key task that, will result in the greatest sort of ROI, if you will, on my time? And that was entirely making sales calls and closing investors. And so I've essentially designed marketing processes and systems that mean that my calendar gets filled up by our marketing or my assistant placing cold calls with sales investor calls on a daily basis, and 100% of my work is happening basically via phone call or Zoom, and I can set my own hours in that regard. So that allowed me to say, why am I going to be in one place? I can go anywhere as long as I have an internet connection. I can make calls. Like I could do this from anywhere as long as I stick to certain time zone hours or whatever. Um, I could go do that. So I did, and I just got back actually just a couple weeks ago from doing 12 months of traveling around the world and 17 countries visited.
It's incredible. So I actually, and this is me getting selfish here. So sorry, not sorry to the audience, but I'm just dying to know, where did you go and travel to on this 12-month voyage? And can you kind of break down how that kind of structured and went out? Because this is when things get really interesting. And I just wanted, before we get into it, because I was in residential real estate. So I was a realtor. I think you were as well, which you mentioned. And
Mhm.
although it's a great way to make a living, you are very confined to one location. But now I'm fortunately and very grateful to say that I'm the only remote employee at Lone Star Capital. So I get the best of both worlds. I get to live in Phoenix when it's nice like it is right now, although a little cold for my taste, as you might agree. And then I'm in Oregon in the summer, and then I try to go to Europe or New York, obviously, throughout the summer to get some of my travel thirst done. But I can be, kind of autonomous. And that ability, I think people are really appreciating now. I think the days of just making the most amount of money isn't as attractive as other freedoms are. And, personally, I don't know what the price I put on my autonomy, but it's very, very high. I will leave money on the table, if you will, for the ability to kind of locational freedom to a certain extent, so long as I'm in a reasonable time zone and or I make the calls and my appointments in that time zone that makes sense for, American time.
Yeah, well, and that what you just said is entirely the reason that I hired my first assistant, is because essentially what I did is I bought back my time. I could sit there cold calling leads all day, or I could pay somebody to do it and make sure that by the time they get to me, they're like a very highly qualified lead who is actually interested in investing, which is the highest ROI on my time. So yeah, that you're buying back your freedom, you're buying back your time by automating things like that as much as possible. Um,
So
and
let's get it.
to
Yeah,
it,
let's get into the. Yeah, so let's get
yeah.
into now backtracking, forward tracking. Now
Yeah.
let's get into the places that you visited, the why, maybe what it's called, if you want to give it a plug, and kind of how it's structured out. Because I'm so fascinated by this. This is like the most interesting thing I could possibly talk about.
Well, so again, in the same vein of me sort of taking things off of my plate as much as possible, for anybody here who's ever tried to plan a world trip for themselves, the amount of logistics that go into when you're going to be in what cities, where you're going to stay, what you're going to do when you're there, all the hotel bookings, all the what, it's a lot. And I just didn't want to do any of that. So I went through a company called Remote Year. Um, they still exist. They just got bought out, but there's a few other companies in this space as well that do something similar. I think Wi-Fi Tribe is one of them, but essentially they take all of the logistics out of it for you. You end up paying them, but they take care of your housing. They take care of like what city you're going to be in, when you're going to be there. They even do the flights in between the countries and all this kind of stuff. And they have, excursions and things like that in each city that you can pay for and do, obviously, for extra fees. So I started in Mexico, kind of worked my way down through South America for the first 4 months, flew over to South Africa, and then up to Europe, did Europe for a few months, and then over to Asia for the last 4 months. And yeah, and so each country I would stay in for about 1 month at a time, but I would hit little side trips to other countries in the middle and do a couple days here and there.
So would it
Um,
be kind of like weekend trips or maybe midweek
yeah,
trips you'd go to
weekend or
XYZ spot?
transitioning between two countries. Maybe I'd stop at somewhere in the middle, something like that. Yeah.
So what month were you in which respective country?
Mexico was the first month, which was about a year ago. So October of last year, I began. This time last year, I was in Colombia, then Peru, Brazil, South Africa, Greece, Spain, Croatia. Um, let's see, that brings us through May. And then June was Vietnam, Thailand, Japan, and Indonesia, and I would hit quite a few little countries in between all those. I think some notable ones was I did a road
I'm
trip.
just I'm just so jealous to hear that. That's so cool. So what were kind of the experiences that, kind of went underway on that? And then how did you find the service, and like from a cost perspective, how could you do that? And then also make your kind of career and business work as well. I mean, obviously the first half was easy because
Yeah,
those who may or may not know, obviously America and South America are essentially in the same time zone, maybe 3 hours ahead if you're in Brazil, 4 hours ahead, but that's very manageable. But how did kind of all kind of structure out, and how did you, basically have a well-oiled machine where you're actually profiting during these times?
yeah, and I would say for the first like 8 months or so, it worked out really well. So yeah, South America, very similar time zone. I would basically not even change my working hours for the most part. If they just get pushed back like a little bit, but still, nothing unreasonable. And then when I get into Africa and Europe, that's actually a really enjoyable time zone because they start working in 2 3 4 p.m. and you work until midnight or so, maybe 11, but you get the whole morning to do whatever you want, and wake up whenever you want, relax, go to the gym, whatever. That was very enjoyable for me. And Asia was much tougher.
Asia is basically undoable to travel to if you're
It
trying to like
really
get anything done.
I,
There's like maybe an hour of overlap, but it would be like 9 p.m. would be like 5 a.m. Eastern almost, where it's like, okay, this is not very
yeah.
good.
Most of the places I was in Asia were 12 hours ahead of the East Coast, so just flip flop day and night. And then, when I was in Japan, that was like 17 hours ahead of where my business is in Phoenix, and that was just unreal. That was so difficult. So yeah, I probably wouldn't suggest Asia to anybody
Yeah,
thinking, unless you're like a developer, who can do
yeah,
like asynchronous work or something like that. But if you're making calls to people in the US, I would not suggest Asia for any reason.
yeah.
Go there when
So,
you can just be on vacation. It's wonderful.
so what were some of the lessons that you learned along the way, and did you get the traveling out of your system at that point? How did that all kind of land for you and whatnot?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, it's about to be Thanksgiving again right here, and about 0% of me wants to get on a plane anytime soon. So
Yeah,
I think it's out of my system for the time
for
being.
now.
For now, yeah, it'll creep back in, but I need some stability for a few months. It's funny. I think that I like saying that I traveled all around the world, just to discover that I really like my house.
Yeah, right, right.
I really like the way everything's set up here. It's so comfortable. I miss
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Well, the
But
biggest thing I think you really learn, and it's kind of funny because, I've been to Asia prior to me moving to Phoenix. Funny, I lasted 9 months in true corporate America. I would not say that I'm in corporate America now. I was doing tech sales for DoorDash here. It was the Tempe office, or it was Phoenix. Now it's Tempe
oh
office
yeah,
near
I wonder
Tempe
if you
Town
know my
Lakes.
buddy.
Yeah, super nice. We'll have to collaborate on that. But I was working there for some time. Realized, yeah, I'm just not going to be here long term. This is not for me. I'm just not really someone that might fit in the more typical corporate environment, if you will. I was doing residential real estate before, then after, and then of course fell into Lone Star Capital, which I'm still, kind of in an island situation, which is probably better for my personality type because, if I'm around people, I can be a little disruptive. I'm a little ADD and such. So conversations like this keep me focused and going, and it's really good. But I can't imagine that. But before going and leaving corporate America, or sorry, starting corporate America, I went to Asia, and little things like your bathroom and toilet paper and little stuff that we take for granted are really, I guess, good reminders. I mean, you might have had some of the shock value from being in South America before going over there, but was that kind of jarring? Like, what, I guess, of each place that you're in did made
Okay.
you miss things of homes, or and what was, I guess, better, like from South America to Africa to Europe to Asia? Like, what did you miss and what was better?
Okay. In a lot of places, the food was better. Now, that's not to say that you can't find excellent food in the U.S. Of course you can, and of course there's wonderful restaurants, and if you really go looking, you can find really high quality produce and stuff like that at farmers markets. But the vast majority of the food supply in America is just absolute trash. And if you go to a lot of other countries, like especially in Europe, the safety regulations and quality standards of produce is just unbelievable. It's so much better. And
No
Africa,
pesticides or
yeah,
things of
no
that nature.
pesticides, none of that stuff. And you can just tell when you eat this stuff that it's just so much fresher. It hasn't been stored, in an oxygen deprived tanker for, 6 months. That's how long ago it was picked before it arrives on the grocery store shelf here. So, a lot of that, the food was super fresh. But yeah, at the end of the day, I got to tell you, like, there's a reason that everybody wants to come to America still, right? And sometimes you just got to leave to understand how much better we really have it than almost everywhere in the world. And like, you can have a really high quality of life in a lot of places, but they all come with their own issues, whether it's, personal freedoms of safety, all these kinds of things. Like South Africa comes to mind as a place where you could have an unbelievably high quality of life for very little money, but you have a trade-off in sort of, the safety concern. Um, so yeah, Asia in particular, my first getting dropped off, like my first experience in Asia was in Hanoi, Vietnam, which
I mean,
is like,
Vietnam, which is Saigon, right? So Fort Hanoi now I believe it's called Saigon. Is that, or
I
it
know
used to be called
Saigon was
Saigon?
before. Saigon's Ho
Yeah,
Chi Minh City in the south. So
yeah.
Hanoi is the capital in the north,
Oh, okay,
and it's
that's
a
right.
city of 12 million people and 10 million motorbikes. It is the most insane thing. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched videos of people trying to cross the street in Hanoi, Vietnam, but it is the most stressful, stress-inducing thing you've ever seen. And that was my first introduction to Asia. So yeah, I definitely had some culture shock being there, but I got used to it eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I try to explain to people going to Europe is one thing. If you go to London, it's like you've never traveled before. Maybe it's like slightly jarring, but all you have to do is look on the other side of the road. You look right, not left, right? That's how it kind of works there. And there's even signs that say look right, not left
Mhm.
if you're crossing the street, right? Or inverse, so on and so forth. So, but you get to Asia and you realize how big the world is and actually how rich you are in America, proportionally speaking, because people literally live on pennies a day. It is really crazy being in Asia. And then also the plumbing. You're literally using the restroom in a hole, and they'll give you, if anything, a slice, like a tissue almost for your entire toilet paper. So you can do the math on how difficult that can be. Sometimes it's squatty guns. I'm sure you have a comment on that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, except for Japan, right? Except for the Japanese figured out how to take the most disgusting things that human do and turn it into a pleasurable experience. So go to
Right.
Japan and take a crap. It's a wonderful time.
Right, right. So, what about South America was interesting to you? Would you say, if you want to, just if we can go through notes here? So, what about South America was coolest? What were your kind of favorite experiences there?
Well, Mexico is fantastic. And I mean, it's such a big place and has so much to offer. I think a lot of Americans have kind of a jaded opinion of Mexico just because of everything that's going on the border and with immigration and, what they hear about the cartels and gang violence and that kind of stuff. But Mexico City is such a cool, cosmopolitan place. Unbelievable food, unbelievable bars. You walk around, everything's super walkable. Beautiful, beautiful town. Um, Colombia, a lot of fun if you're like 20, and this is Medellin specifically. If you're like in your early 20s and you want to party, that's pretty much the best place. I was not in my early 20s when I went there, so maybe a different time in life. But Colombian, I will say this, I get some crap for this, but Colombians do not know how to season their food. So bad food in Colombia. Sorry, Colombians. And let's see, Peru was probably in my top 2, 3 out of all the countries I went to. There is so much to do in Peru. Whether you go to like the deserts in the south or the Amazon rainforest in the north or Machu Picchu in the mountains and just the city of Lima, like there's so much adventure to be had in Peru, and the food is amazing and the people are so nice, and there's so much like diverse influence of cuisine from like Asia and all the Japanese and Chinese who came to Peru. Just nothing but good things to say about Peru.
And then let's talk about maybe South Africa and Europe, kind of the highlights there, and maybe the lessons you learned there.
Yeah, South Africa blew me away. Cape Town in particular. I didn't make it, all over, but for Americans, this is usually the analogy I use. It's like, imagine you lived in Los Angeles, but you're surrounded by mountains that are the size of Colorado mountains. But the weather is comparable to Southern California, except for you're also a 30-minute drive from Napa. And taking an Uber there only costs $2. And then you get to the most fertile, beautiful winelands in the country, and you ask for their nicest bottle, and they tell you it costs $5. and you can just do that every weekend. It's unbelievable. And then uh, you can go on safaris, you can go to Kruger National Park. There's just so much to do in South Africa. I absolutely loved it. But again, a place with a very complicated history and political environment, and there's trade-offs. But I think that for anybody listening who wants to go live a very high quality of life, I could not recommend Cape Town enough.
Fair enough. And then let's talk to Europe.
Europe, yeah. Let's see, Greece. I did some island hopping. Super, super fun.
What
Can't
time of year
recommend
were
that
you there?
enough. Yeah, excellent food in Greece. I was there in March, which is before the season starts. So it was actually it was a little bit cold, but we rented a car, and like it was super cheap. Like, I don't know, $10-15 a day to rent a car, just drive all around the islands and explore them before they were very busy, and fantastic food. So really, really good time. Spain, I I was shocked in Spain at like how much I thought this is a place I could really live. Like, you could have a high quality of life here. The food is so fresh. The cities are very walkable. The architecture is beautiful. The people are really nice. It is, very comparable to the first world. I would say that something that's frustrating about Europe is that nobody believes in clothes dryers. But otherwise, you could have a very high quality of life in Spain.
Right. And then finally, let's round it out to Asia. What were some of the lessons there? And, do you see yourself wanting to go back there after being there for so long? Or did you get
Yeah.
all out of your
Well,
system?
so something that people don't really know about me until I mention it is that I actually speak 5 languages to varying degrees. Um, and one of those, the most recent one that I've like really been going heavy on for the last year and a half, has been Japanese. So I was really ready by the time that we got to Japan. I've been looking forward to Japan my whole life, and I learned a lot that I didn't expect, because I'd seen so many reels and TikToks and videos and all this kind of. I just thought I knew what to expect about a Japanese travel experience, and then it was actually very different in a lot of ways from what I expected. For everything that is so amazing in Japan that they have figured out how to do better than us, like public transportation, there is also something that is equally as frustrating and backwards. And you're like, why haven't you figured this one out? It's like, there are no trash cans in public anywhere. They just don't exist. So you have to hang on to
Does
your
no one
trash.
ever have any debris on them or
No, they
any
all
like
do. You just have to hang on to it. So like, just little
bizarre?
things like that, like, accepting credit cards is a very new thing in Japan, right? Like, I didn't have too much issue with it, but there are tons of places that are cash only for like a society that, invented a toilet that washes your butthole for you. I don't get
You
it.
you'd figure that their fintech is incredible and like they've
Yeah.
got, Apple Pay and things of that nature just dialed up,
Yeah,
first, right? But
you would.
interesting.
It's such an interesting place because it was such an isolationist society for so long. And there's just so many things that are culturally alien to the rest of the world, which is by and large kind of taken a lot from Western culture. And there's, I don't know, a sense of normalization in a lot of these places, but Japan is so different. It's really,
Yeah.
really
So
different.
if I think about Asia, there's probably a couple sections. There's the Koreas, specifically, South, and Japan, which are similar. China, which probably has some flair and flavor from those places. Probably, normalish toilets, but China's crazy. Totally different world. And then there's the Southeast Asia, which is Indonesia,
Mhm.
Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia,
Vietnam, yeah.
Vietnam, so on and so forth. Would you say those 2 places felt completely different, even
Yeah.
though it's still Asia?
Yeah. So I only did Southeast Asia and Japan is not Southeast. Like, there's just no, it's so different.
No.
And Southeast Asia is wonderful. I love it. There, you do have quite a bit of heat and humidity depending on where you are. And there's quite a bit of culture shock, but, um, it's such a beautiful, beautiful place to explore. The dollar goes really, really far. Food is cheap and delicious, and people are nice. Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, all wonderful places, and Malaysia too. I also went to Singapore. That's more like Japan. Um, Singapore is interesting. Singapore is like, if you've ever been playing a video game and there's a futuristic utopia of like trees and tall buildings, that's what Singapore feels like.
Yeah, no, Singapore is really high on my list, actually. I really want to get over to Asia at some point. It's just very difficult to, as mentioned here, make it work. But I think that'll be my next winter trip, for sure, just to plan out and, to make it happen like that. Um, did you go into it knowing how your day and travel or your work schedule would work around traveling and whatnot? Or did you kind of have to figure that out on the fly? Was that something that you kind of worked through and refined throughout the journey?
It changed every month. And that's something that was really interesting for me as an adjustment because, 1 month in each country was exactly enough time to get settled and build a routine and then destroy it and then leave.
Yeah.
It was like exactly how much time I needed to feel very comfortable and then just I'm out. So every month it was a little different. One of the things that Remote Year did supply to us, which was very useful to me, is a co-working space. And since I've come back to the US, I like really, really see the value in these places, especially as remote employees, to be around other people who are also there every day, being productive and working. And to me, that was a very, very helpful thing. So I've actually, since coming back, bought an office in a co-working space, and it's in a high rise here in downtown Phoenix. And I'm very stoked about it, because I like being around other productive people. And so every month, yeah, if I could stick to my routine as much as possible, wake up, have coffee, go to the gym, do that kind of stuff, and then go into a co-working space and then work as much as possible. But again, the hours in each place, it's dependent on the time zone that I was in.
Yeah, it makes sense. Is there any places that you would want to kind of split life live in a sense where you maybe have Phoenix as your home base, but you could see yourself working from for portions in the year moving forward? Or is that kind of an experiment that's, out of your system now moving forward? How does that kind of land for you?
Well, so yes is absolutely the answer. The feasibility of it is less so. I know I can't go live in Asia for 3 months and kind of work, responsibly here. So I love Asia. I miss it. I will find a way to get back there when I'm not working so hard. But yeah, Peru, South Africa, Greece, Spain, all of these kinds of places, very, very high on my list.
Right. So you would want to maybe work there for periods of time, be there maybe for a month or
Yeah.
two or so of the year
Oh,
and
I
make
think
that
the
happen.
perfect way to do it is 3 months in one location, and then you take weekend trips. Like if you stayed in Cape Town for 3 months, then you could go over to Zimbabwe for a weekend or Zambia or wherever, Tanzania, and then you don't have to. Another takeaway from this is that you acquire a lot of stuff when you are traveling like this. In each country, you might buy a piece of clothes here or there, a little souvenir. Before you know it, your check bag gets really heavy and you're pretty much dreading the part where they weigh your bag at the airport because you're about to get hit with that overweight fee. So having a little weekender carry on and then going to someplace and coming back, it eliminates a lot of stress.
Makes sense.
Especially in Asia, they're super strict about weight limits on your bags.
So you went through an exercise, with kind of life by design, kind of something of that nature.
Mhm.
How do you look at, the life work balance now? Because I think you're someone that really has prioritized experience and life. And, it's not all about the money. And I say that often just about what my lifestyle decisions are. And obviously you probably agree that it's not all about the money because you're obviously a very skilled and talented person. You're choosing to live a certain way. So how do you kind of holistically look at life through that lens of, experience and also making sure that you're rich and not just your bank account, but your experiences and friendships and things of that nature?
Yeah. Well, so I could tell you that like the reason I left Phoenix in the first place for this experience is because I was, I had really prioritized a few things in my life. One was, freedom of time, and two was my health. So, I have a lot of health issues in the past, illness, things like that. And I spent basically a year trying to get myself healthy again and really prioritize my habits designed to, have the healthiest outcome for my body. And then at the end of that, I realized, hey, here I am in Phoenix. I've got my life exactly set up how I want. My days go exactly how I want. But on any given day, I might interact with, the one person at the gym or the cashier at the grocery store, and that's it, right? And I think in America, it is an epidemic here in some, like loneliness here is an epidemic. I think a lot of people, especially post pandemic, are just not having social interaction the way they used to. And Everybody's kind of glued to their phones all the time, and I don't have a great solution for that. I live in the suburbs. It's like if I want to go anywhere, I have to drive. It's not really walkable, right? But in a lot of these cities, as I was traveling, I really just got the sense like there is so much life in the city. The way that people sit in cafes and they're just walking from place to place with their dogs and their babies in strollers, and there's just people everywhere living life and feeling good. I do think that's something that we miss in America, and we need to prioritize our human connection and experience. So, um, yeah, if you are listening to this and you're relating in any way, I don't know, go to meetup.com, go to a real estate meetup, go meet some people, go to a conference, get out there and be social, and make some friends, invite some people over for dinner. But like, I think that's something that we just don't do enough of here at all.
Yeah, I think people are so busy now too, and unfortunately, technology is a coping mechanism where everyone's connected, but you're actually more disconnected than ever, right? Because even when you're around one another, you're on your phone. I think we're all victim of that, guilty of that. I'm very guilty of that, and kind of funny to your point there. I kind of make myself go to the gym not because I want to just go there, but I need to interact with people because I also work from home, and
Mhm.
it can feel lonely. Now that I know you're here and you're going through the same stuff, we'll have to obviously meet up, go to dinner, smoke cigars, do the whole thing, so on and so forth, but to make sure that we're interacting and collaborating and sharing thoughts and ideas. But you can get so into your own world sometimes you kind of forget about that. So it's such a good point to mention there. And being social and whatnot, getting a hobby to that point. And it's kind of funny, with joining real estate groups, being around more people, being a part of Fully Funded, being a part of Raise Masters, being a part of other groups and whatnot. It's really actually, fortunately, created a really large community. So I think that point of to real estate meetups, doing stuff like that, super crucial. I've been playing a lot of golf recently, which inherently has become the best social tool ever for me personally, because hey, you're with people for 4 hours, you're chit-chatting, you're shooting the breeze and having a good time. And it's not a forced conversation because there's so much going on with the golf game. So finding hobbies like that, a lot of people getting into pickleball and running clubs. So I can't advocate for that enough. Community is so valuable. So yeah, there's my rant there. Well, Michael, thank you so much for being such a great guest today. Is there any other kind of parting wisdom you'd like to leave us with? Because, with how traveled and how much experience in life you've lived, although you're young, you've experienced way more than the average person.
I think we've gone over a lot, and I really hope that your guests find it insightful. And I really appreciate the way that this is probably a real estate podcast, but we dug into travel specifically. That that's exciting for me because it's not about the money and the real estate, right? It's about what do you want to do? How do you want to live your life? What do you want your day to look like? If you could wake up in the morning and have a perfect day, what does that look like for you, right? And so I think that's something that I try to live by and try to model as much as humanly possible. And I hope that, maybe some of your listeners can find that inspiring.
Yeah, no, and I think about this all the time, and that's why I really want to have you on here because life's all about options and the ones that you create. But those options only come from working really hard. In your presentation, you kind of went through how you're literally doing the work yourself, laying the tile yourself, ripping these things out. This didn't just come on accident. So there was a ton of work here that went behind the scenes. It's the tip of the iceberg analogy, right? But then you got life on your terms. You can live that way. It does take time, but there are options. There are ways to do things. And then when you do get success, when you do start making money, please, 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 investing in material possessions is fine and all, but it will not last the way your memories will from a super awesome travel time. And at the end of the day, you can't take all these material possessions to the grave, but the experiences that you've had, will last. And the thoughts that you have, it's kind of like passive income, but it's passive memory banks. I think about all the time, whenever it's going on, about the experiences I had when I went to my Asia trips, my Europe trips. Things like that really hold more value to me than anything I've ever purchased before in my life. They'll never, ever amount to that. And also to be able to travel that before life gets too hectic. I'd like to be a father and a husband at some point, and that's going to take away from my ability to, on a whim, go into Asia for about a month and a half, or you probably going on a world tour, right? So doing these things, it's very inspiring, but there's options, and you just always have to realize that experiences like this are super important, and you can't forget to live. So that's kind of why I wanted to have you on here, because I think you exemplify that so well.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. For all the listeners here, thank you so much for your time. We will see you next week. Peace.